All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, my name is Bryan. I'm a political economist here at the LSE, School of Public Policy, Stickert Research Institute, and from the Department of Philosophy, Logic, and Scientific Method. I'm also the director of the Hayek program, not the Hayek Society, which is a student society, but the academic Hayek program, which is hosting tonight's proceedings. So I encourage all of you to check out our future events here through the Eventbrite system, which you can access through Google. Next week on Thursday, we are hosting Professor Art Leffer, economist Art Leffer, the originator.
Art is my old friend. Say hi to him. We were assistant professors at the University of Chicago in the 1960s. He was in business school. I was in economics. And he's a wild and crazy guy.
Well, tell him you said hi. Yeah, so Art is releasing a new book, so he'll be launching it here with us to the Hayek program. So
he has turtles.
Yes, well.
Turtles that big. We're not making this up. Ask him about his turtles.
So feel free to approach me at the end of this event if you want to know more about our program, and I'll give you my business card. So the aim of our program is to explore and advance the intellectual contributions of political economists and philosopher F.A. Hayek. These include individualism and economic freedom, the importance of limited government under the rule of law, the epistemic limits of centralized planning in a world of great complexity. These ideas are not left or right-wing, but liberal in the classical sense of the term. A tradition which includes, but not exclusive of, the likes of historical figures like Adam Smith, David Hume, John Locke, Benjamin Constant, Mary Wollstonecraft, Alexis de Tocqueville, the American framers of the Constitution, and many more in the 20th century, whom I cannot name. As such, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest for tonight, who has done more than most actually to advance these classical liberal ideas in the world we live in. Deirdre McCloskey is a distinguished scholar and Isaiah Berlin Chair in Liberal Thought at the Cato Institute. She is also a distinguished Professor Emerita of Economics and of History and Professor Emerita of English and of Communication at the University of Illinois, Chicago. After getting a PhD in economics at Harvard, she taught at the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa. She has written 24 books and counting, and some 400 academic and popular articles on economic theory, economic history, philosophy, rhetoric, statistical theory, feminism, ethics, and law. Her books include the famous Bourgeois trilogy, first Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics on the Age of Capitalism, 2006, Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World, 2010, Bourgeois Equality, How Ideas, Not Capital, or Institutions Enriched the Modern World, 2016, all published by Chicago Press. Why Liberalism Works, How True Liberal Values Produce a Freer, More Equal, Prosperous World for All, 2019. My personal favorite are Bettering Humanomics, 2021, and Beyond Positivism in 2022, because I'm interested in methodology. So tonight's event will be structured as a sit-down interview with Dr. McCloskey, myself, as well as Mr. Mani Basharzard, an economic journalist and a junior research associate at the Institute of Economic Affairs. We'll first be asking Deirdre some questions, and we'll gradually incorporate questions from the audience. Because I do not have any event stewards, I will ask for all of your assistance and help in passing through the two roving microphones and to ask a question and to briefly state your name before you speak. We'll generally discuss the question, has the free market failed? But we'll also be exploring other related questions and topics, such as Deirdre's contributions to economic history, her views on contemporary politics, and the economic method. Do note that this event is recorded and will be put up on YouTube in the next few weeks. We will end approximately at 8 p.m. Thank you very much. We'll put these two microphones on the first row. Please start with your first question.
Yes. The story of my fascination with Professor McCloskey is a long one. I had the privilege of interviewing her twice. Once when I was living in the free world and once when I wasn't. When the first interview happened, the Ministry of Truth that has a real name in Iran, it's called the Minister of Guidance, literally, didn't like one of Professor McCloskey's answers. So I'm going to start my first question by reading that censored part aloud.
I would love to hear.
The enemies of liberalism are enchanted by the two other new political ideas in the modern world, nationalism and socialism, or sometimes by the pre-modern ideas of theocracy. Now we can understand why it was censored. All these treat people as children to be led by their betters. Only liberalism, and only liberalism, treats people as adults. It could be called adultism. End of quote. And you talk about adultism as a synonym for liberalism, but in the recent decades, we have seen a new consensus on paternalism. The idea that the state should decide for individuals rather than individuals for themselves, or what you call in your book, Beyond Positivism, Behaviorism, and Neo-Institutionalism, economic daddy knows the best. My question is, isn't that a failure of liberalism itself? Because so many people argue that when you give freedom to consumers, when you give freedom to people, what they're going to do, they're going to buy junk food. They're going to buy cigarettes. They're going to take bad decisions. So we need the state to guide them, to nudge them, to direct them toward better decision making. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's spinach, and I say to hell with it. I think that the great liberal idea of the late 18th century, Adam Smith, Mary Wollstonecraft, Tom Paine, and so forth, was to treat everyone like an adult. I call it now equality of permission, allowing you to have a go. As the Australians say, the Australians say, fair goes. First, the Toms get the bat, and then we, the Australians, get the bat. And it's extremely radical. In a world in which hierarchy ruled, as in Iran, the supreme leader rules. And it denied hierarchy. In fact, if you had to summarize this primary liberalism, this first one, you'd say no masters. Being a master means, means physical coercion. Being able to physically coerce people. A husband able to beat her wife, his wife. The Ayatollah being able to force women to wear the veil under his mom is a persistent rebel against this, by the way. So a cheer for her. So, the second liberalism is that of 1848, either socialism or what came to be called in Britain, and then the new liberalism, in which the state was to be the father. Urban renewal is an example. And that motto was no poor. And it turned out that it didn't work very well, would be that's what you just heard is a fairly quick summary of a book of mine that's going to come out in about a year called Equality of Permission, the First Liberalism.
So, Deirdre, I want to shift gears and ask about current affairs. So these ideas that you described as increasingly rejected, actually, increasingly unpopular in the political spectrum on both left and right.
Everyone wants to be a baby again.
So I was curious to get your thoughts on what do you think are some of these factors that's driving, the populism and the discontent, both left and right?
Look, in 1945, we thought we had killed fascism. Yes. In 1989, we thought we had killed communism. Damn right. But like the living dead, they keep coming back. I propose that this time we drive a stake through their evil hearts at the crossroads, a silver stake, by the way, at the crossroads by the light of the full moon. We've got to keep resisting what O'Brien, the party man in Orwell's 1984, declared as the future of the human race. A boot on a human face forever. That's what the two extremes, fascism and communism, promise. It's what my president of the United States is working towards right as we speak. And that's what we've got to resist. And the resistance is that of adults, responsible about adults. Not children who are saying, oh, well, take care of me, Daddy. Because Daddy is very willing to.
You argued about Donald Trump and building up on Bryan's point that the consensus against free market is becoming a mainstream thing. And you're saying both on the left and the right that there has been a consensus against free market. For example, on the left, they believe that free market and free trade is enriching the rich countries at the expense of poor countries. On the right, it's the opposite. They think the poor countries are being enriched in the expense of the rich countries. But both of them reached the same conclusion of the Economist magazine called Homeland Economics.
That's a nice phrase. Yeah. We have a department, what's it called?
Homeland Security.
Homeland Security. It's always felt vaguely Nazi to me. the very word, the homeland, blood and soil.
Going back to my question, I just wanted to.
I get very excited about these things.
I just wanted to know why this revolt has happened against free markets. Because the product of free market of the 80s, not fully free market, but it was economic growth, it was better innovation. But
one of the problems is that the moderates, now if we've sufficiently established that and I hope most of this audience is against fascism, and I hope 95% of you are against communism in its, Stalinist form. But one of the problems is that even our friends are statists. Even the middle, the nice people. Francis Fukuyama, who's a friend of mine. Cass Sunstein, who's a friend of mine. These are moderate right, moderate left in the United States. Cass is one of the nudgers. He was actually in the Obama administration assigned to nudge people so that they wouldn't eat Fritos all day, that they would eat less or something. I don't know what he had in mind. But so, and the problem is that they're both, and I explained how in this book. These are friends, as I said, so I try to be as gentle as I can. But they're both statists, and they, in the sense that the opposite of this primary liberalism. Judith Shklar, who was a great political theorist at Harvard in the late 20th century, she was hired by my father, actually. I've got an amusing story about that. But anyway, she advocated a liberalism of fear of the state. Because her point was that you don't need to be an anarchist to know that history shows over and over again that states are dangerous. I mean, if nice people are like my cousins who work at the CIA, if nice people like my cousins are in charge, I gotta worry. But the trouble is that non-nice people often get into it. And this whole notion of the state. So now, in my own original technical field, economics, um, you'll hear the claim over and over and over again from people like Joe Stiglitz and endless over Darren Ashimolu, or endlessly they'll say, "Ah, but the free market is imperfect," and so the state needs to step in. Now think about that as a logical proposition, as a factual scientific proposition. Somehow they've got to establish empirically how much the market fails. Market failures, monopoly, externalities, economies of scale, blah, blah, blah. The tendency to mass unemployment, all the things that have been claimed by economists since 1848 that are imperfections in the economy. So they have to establish that empirically. And then they've got to establish that the government can do better. And isn't that kind of obvious? I mean, it's kind of obvious. If you have a personal problem, you've got to know that it's a personal problem and a serious one, and then you've got to stop drinking, dear. and you've got but you have to know that that's going to be effective. Neither of them are established empirically. If there are economists here who would say the contrary, tell me your evidence, and I'd like to see it. It's shocking.
But even theoretically, I think it's rather problematic, because when I talk to students about market failure, I like to say that many of the imperfections in markets, you can actually flip it around and it's exacerbated in politics. And if you take one example, that of externalities, right, which are spillover effects on third parties, right? In politics, there are political externalities, right, where benefits are concentrated on certain groups but externalized across the whole of society, right? That seems to be inbuilt in politics, right? And then you have this case of imperfect information, consumers not being able to make good choices. Well, if that is true, how do we expect these same voters to select the right politicians, then govern them and engage in paternalism to achieve market efficiency? I mean, you can simply
and then furthermore, one is assuming that the politicians know what they're doing. Now, look, wait a second. I'm not going to say government is all bad and every politician is. Although the great American journalist H.O. Mencken of a century ago used to say, the idea of an honest politician is like that of an honest burglar. But I don't actually think that. I don't think that everyone in politics is a thief. But I do not think that they all know what they're doing. There is a woman named Mariana Mazzucato, who is a very well-known economist, who didn't ever really learn economics, I'm sorry to say. And she's going around advising governments. I just learned from him this evening that she's advising Southeast Asian governments, many of them. And she says, as is about to happen in the EU in a big, big, big scale, trillions of dollars, she's advising the government to guide innovation. Does it strike you that the average arts graduate in Whitehall is a good person to guide innovation? And my thought is, well, not. And it just seems, we were discussing this an hour ago, is to think that, look, in war it works. In war, the job is to defeat the Germans. Okay? And we're going to try to do it through invading Italy. Well, let's soften their belly. Well, then okay, that worked a little bit. Then okay, wait a second. Let's take all those people and put them on the coast of France. That's our second. Okay, that's how war works, and that's how it should work. And by the way, it's how a family works. Family has one purpose. We're going to get the meal on the table this evening. Let's do it. But a society as large as the UK or the United States, there's no one purpose. So there's no aggregate that we can, there's no big cannon we can aim in one direction. And that's what Mazzucato and Stiglitz and all the rest have in mind. That the government can somehow aim the economy in the correct direction. And this, to put it, is loco, pazzo, nuts, in my opinion.
So if anyone is interested in Mazzucato and industrial policy, I would recommend Deirdre has a short book on that with Alberto Miliardi. And I also have a paper I recently published called Why Mission-Directed Governments Risk Authoritarianism, Lessons from East Asia. Because lots of industrial policy advocates like to use East Asian countries as an example of success.
South Korea especially.
Exactly, South Korea, things like that. So basically, in my paper, I show, the height of industrial policy in these nations were during authoritarian era. And there is actually, there is no coincidence that that's the case, right? So this is not an ideological argument. It's a logical institutional analysis when you try to have a single public purpose that everyone's supposed to follow. And I quote her. She says, "All to work symbiotically for a common purpose." I'm quoting page 205.
And that's damn right. That on the war analogy, that's right. We're defeating the Germans. Period. That's what we're doing. Okay, I get it. And that's correct. And I'm so glad that your ancestors did this. You know what Margaret Thatcher said when Boris Becker won Wimbledon? He said to her, he's a very vulgar man, he said, "Vel, how does it feel for a German to defeat you in your national game?" And she was a clever lass, Margaret was. She said, "Well," in her fake, plummy voice, "well, I seem to remember that we defeated you in your national sport twice." But that's, and again, see, it's a sports analogy. There are all kinds of analogies that come in here. The war analogy, the sports analogy, the family analogy. And all of them are dangerous.
You mentioned the idea of social engineering and Mazzucato, and I was reminded of your book in 1990, If You're Smart. And the simple question is, if they're so smart, why they're not rich? If they know where the economy should go, if they know where innovation should go, then they should be investors and investing, and they would be billionaires rather than sitting in the
I've become recently, slowly, very radical about this, about central banks. I believe that government should not have a monopoly of money, that monies should be issued privately, as they have been in some periods. In Scotland in the 18th century, the United States before the Civil War, private issue of notes was commonplace. I think that's what should happen. And the idea that the Federal Reserve Bank, the United States, which has hundreds of economists about a mile from where I live, can steer the economy. Those people, if they could steer the economy, must know what the future is going to bring, right? If you're steering a car, you have to know what the road is. You don't just close your eyes and steer. You have to know. And if they know, as my book of 1990 said, what are you doing in the Federal Reserve Board? Why don't you go to Wall Street and make a fortune? Buy a Caribbean island and entice girls to meddle with. How's that for a business plan?
So, Deirdre, I'd like to bring in for the sake of playing devil's advocate, Joseph Stiglitz, whom you mentioned.
He's a sweet guy. He's a nice fella, but he's a man of the left, and he's a theoretician. He does. Oh, it's been erased, but there was math up here. He does that.
So Joseph Stiglitz recently published a new book called The Road to Freedom, and in which he basically argues that we are living in a world of neoliberal market fundamentalism, and that has led to inequality, and inequality has led to populism. Populism has led to authoritarians like Donald Trump. Therefore, neoliberal market fundamentalism is responsible for the authoritarianism of the far right.
It's completely crazy.
What is your response?
Well, I think as a political analysis, it's kind of foolish because it seems to me, now I'm no deep student of all this, but it seems to me that the resentment that resulted in you all leaving the EU and the resentment that got Donald Trump elected is mainly a result of measures, you might say. Mainly a result of the arrogance of we're the great and good. Now there, dear, just calm down. And you're a hillbilly. The current United States Vice President became famous with a book called Hillbilly Lament, um, about being treated like a hillbilly, which is an American expression meaning a rural person, redneck, someone with a burnt neck from working in the field. These are all we're from Boston, dear. We're Harvard graduates. Come on, let's arrange your life. Anyway, I'd be voting for Trump if I felt that I was being treated that way.
You mentioned the nudgers and usually the paternalistic mentality that led.
Yeah, they're nice.
Yeah.
They're not saying, they're not pushing, they're nudging.
So I was reminded of what you wrote, that economics is in scientific trouble. So because so many of these ideas like nudging are coming not from populist parties, but from academic,
Right.
the Ivy League universities or Russell Group universities.
Oh yeah, you bet.
So my question is, why do you think economics is in scientific trouble? And how do they get out of it?
Well, because look, we economists have been labeled masters of the universe. That's pretty nice. That people call us masters of the universe and turn to us for sober advice on how to manipulate the rest of the population. And it sounds great. When I was a graduate student back in the 1960s at Harvard, we Harvard, Yale, Princeton graduates, we imagined that we were going to go down to Washington, and this was 1965, 6. We were going to, now hear this, fine-tune the economy. The conviction was that the Keynesian revolution had made it simply a matter of management, of fine-tuning the radio a little bit to keep the economy without, keep the business cycle.
That's a very Keynesian worldview.
What?
It's a very Keynesian worldview.
Very much, and it was anyway, it was completely dominant in my education. So, but we didn't even have a radio. We really didn't. The fact is, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. That was the age, to speak of the technical economics, of the invention of large-scale econometric models, on which I worked as a graduate student. And these aren't agent-based. These are aggregate econometrics based, but they have hundreds of equations. And they couldn't predict inflation at all. I actually worked on one, this is truly bizarre. when I was a graduate student in the summer, I worked on a Colombian transportation project run by John Muir. Colombia, the country, not we're going to plan transportation on the Columbia University campus. Colombia. And I didn't know Spanish. and I was assigned to collect the statistics for our little model of the Colombian economy. And we were being hired by the Colombian government to come down from the famous Harvard University and tell them how to run their transportation system. How does that sound like common sense to you?
In fact, Deirdre, this really brings us to the important contributions of Hayek. And for me, Hayek is not just about ideology, free markets. Actually, the methodological critique of Hayek, to me, is much more important than anything else, right? The idea that you can't see the economy as a bunch of statistical aggregates, basically. Humans as statistical aggregates who respond to some sort of stimulus, predict and stimulus model. Because, in fact, that's a very demeaning way of seeing humans. Rather than seeing them as creative agents with values of their own, discovering values and evolving the values, you're treating people as automatons.
Yeah.
And that's where your work on humane liberalism, the humanism in economics,
well,
that has to be restored.
I call it, and a few others of our tribe, not too many, call it humanomics. Economics with humans left in. And the current excitement, as everyone in this audience knows, is AI, artificial intelligence. And once again, we're thinking we can fine-tune stuff. Because what AI is, well, to put it in a somewhat technical way, it's a Turing machine. It's an input-output device. It's a production function, economists would call it. You put in inputs, you get output. And that's not what many things are. We learned in the 1970s in a massive way that weather is not a Turing machine in this sense. And that with very little tweaks in the differential equations describing what tomorrow's weather will be, enormous chaotic changes in the weather happen. But it's also true of human language. Language is a prime example of Hayek's spontaneous order. So is natural evolution. Natural evolution and language, human language, are unpredictable. They're literally unpredictable. I suppose we can predict that humans will never fall silent. We love to talk. But aside from that, we can't predict what the Chinese language or the English language or whatever is going to be. And the same I'm claiming, and I think Hayek very fundamentally claimed, is true of the human mind. The human mind is not a Turing machine. It's not a copying machine. It's not an input-output system. It's got these elements of chaos, and then also this isn't anti-scientific. This is something that perfectly reputable, hard-nosed scientists, physicists, and biologists, some of them, not all of them, do say. Some brain scientists even.
All right, I'd like to now bring in the audience. So please raise your hands, and we will now pass the microphones around. So after perhaps we have someone right in the middle here, and then we go to the second row, and then I will pick it.
Thank you very much for hosting and the fantastic questions. It was a really great dialogue. Thank you very much. So just following on the point with Joe Stiglitz, he's kind of got this sort of theory in the recent book that you mentioned that there's this sort of fundamental free market, and this has led to a sort of breakdown of the political and economic settlement, and that's caused people to turn to populism.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, one point that you stress in your work is that when you write persuasively and you use classical rhetorical devices, that you should always express parallel ideas in parallel forms. And I was kind of struck by the example that you mentioned on tariffs and how the left and the right had kind of come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
So in the developing world, they were saying, well, we don't want to trade because we're being exploited in a sort of colonial type relationship.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of come full circle, and actually, well, we're being exploited because they have cheap labor and therefore we're getting an unfair deal. So is it the rhetorical firepower of the sort of the left and the far right and the populists that coalesce together to sort of create this emerging consensus that we've seen?
Economists have been trying for 2.5 centuries to persuade people that trade is beneficial. Now, everyone in this room treats trade as beneficial. You go to the grocery store, you buy stuff, you go home and eat it. You say, oh, that's nice. And it is. But Donald Trump would say, look, you've got a balance of payments deficit with your grocery store. Yes, you do. Does that keep you up at night? And yet we can't get this across. When people say, well, we've got to protect people here in Britain, or in London, or in Camden, or on my street, you can see the problem here. If it's really true that non-trade is better than trade, then why am I trading at all? If exchange is basically exploitative, well, why do I engage in it? I must be nuts. So I'll make my own accordion. I'll devise my own theory of quantum mechanics. One more point along this kind of analogy line. If it was a good idea to intervene in this, what Hayek claimed was the spontaneous order of a market economy, why isn't it a good idea to have a ministry of rock music? Or a ministry of the English language? Or, you see the point. That it's not. People who believe we should have free rock music will also believe that we shouldn't have free candy. I don't mean free at zero price. I mean the ability to make candy, like Cadbury's Whole Nut, which was my lunch. I love Cadbury's Whole Nut. They've licensed it in the United States to Hershey. It's in the same package. It doesn't taste the same.
All right, next question. I will get
This guy over here was next.
Yeah, then you next.
Thank you very much. And I really like your point about the free market and the critique being it is free relative to what? That people are saying that maybe government can be more efficient. But to what extent is the answer to that question about positive methodology, about investigating that as a causal matter or a normative belief that yes, in fact, free markets do make our lives better as a matter of principle?
Well, in a lot of people, including me, I have to admit, I have a core conviction which I acquired. I was once a socialist. I slowly acquired the opposite opinion that free markets are quite good. I have a friend named John Mueller who wrote an excellent book in 1999 in the American context called Capitalism, Democracy, and Ralph's Pretty Good Grocery Store, which was a terrible title because no one except fans of Garrison Keillor's show knew what he was talking about, but still. And the point John made is that American democracy, crummy and confused as it is pretty good. That's the phrase used. And the capitalist economy is pretty good. And you don't want to rush to some imagined improvement that you're not sure is going to work. Indeed, when you try it, it doesn't work. So that's one sort of point. But the key point that you're raising, and it's very important, is that both sides really should stop sneering at each other and go get the evidence. And they don't. Actually, on both sides. But it turns out that the free market people, because in the last century, there's been this steady growth of the sentiment of statism. They're fighting against the statism. I'm the president of the Bellarmine Society, founded by Hayek in 1947, precisely against the tide of socialism. And they have to do more empirical work because the other people, the Keynesians and the socialists and so on, just say, well, the free market doesn't work. Look at all the imperfections. Well, I'm willing to entertain. I'm one of the last students of Edward Chamberlain. He of monopolistic competition. He actually taught me economics badly, but he did it. And he had his own little version of imperfection. You gotta have the numbers, and they don't. Shocking. I mean, it's as though some geologist would say, well, I've got a theory of mountain building alternative to this stupid plate tectonics stuff that you guys believe in. It's disgraceful. It's conservative. It's plate tectonics. It's conservative. It's Tory. Don't you know? Plate tectonics is Tory. So I'm going to have nothing to do with that. I've got a new version. You say, well, okay, tell me about your version. Well, mountains arise. And you say, well, have you got quantitative evidence that your theory, whatever the hell it is better than plate tectonics? Well, no, but that's not important. Your theory is Tory, I don't want it. It's stupid. It's shameful. It's a scientific catastrophe in my beloved field of economics. I've been in love with it since I was 18 years old. So I hate to see it go to perdition.
All right, next question from Lady Young.
Just to add a point before the next question, I think Hayek defended freedom on the basis of maximizing the GDP or maximizing utility in some mathematical sense. He wrote, the value of freedom rests upon the opportunities it provides for unforeseen and unpredictable action to happen. So I think the essence of liberty, the essence of freedom for Hayek, to so many classical liberals, was in a sense based in intellectual humility. The fact that we don't know all the answers. And for understanding all the answers, we don't need a state, a central planner to tell us the answers. We need the competitive discovery process of the market, which Professor McCloskey suggests we should call capitalism innovism.
Yeah,
It's basically
that's right. The word capitalism, for reasons I need to undo, is highly misleading.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Alexandra. I want to make a question since you mentioned fascism. As a scholar, we see a big rise of fascism all over the globe. And many countries like Japan and even United States at some point want to kind of close their borders. And as much as we think they're not essential, every country contributes to the global market in different forms for engineering, innovation, and different many things. What would you think as a global society we should behave? Should we let them? Should we treat them like adults and let them close the borders and notice the things that will happen wrong, or should we do different kind of approach, trying to explain, try to bring more proofs, because proofs sometimes are not even enough.
I'm not entirely understanding what you say. It's not your fault. sound systems have a problem. They're not as clear as
Sorry.
ordinary speeches, but perhaps you can tell me what the question was.
I'm also seeking some clarification.
Okay,
Perhaps you
of
can
course.
rephrase it as a question. Yeah.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Sorry for the
No, it's
long.
not your fault. It's the sound system. Really. And my ears, let's put them together. It's a disaster. I'm trying to.
Of course, of course. So my question is directly to how should we behave with societies that are having a growing fascism and want to close their border and also growing nationalism? So we can kind of, should we treat them as adults or should we?
No, we should treat them as adults and say, you wanna make your own accordion and develop your own theories of quantum mechanics, feel free. Because, if you want to go into a monastery and deny yourself Cadbury's nut, that's your choice, and you should be allowed to do it. And the famous episode of the United States Navy forcing Japan to open its borders to trade, and then the same thing happened to China, is disgraceful and shouldn't have happened. But in any case, that other people are exercising protectionist devices, whether closing trade entirely or putting big tariffs on, is no concern to us. We should adopt free trade. Britain, in the middle of the 19th century, adopted free trade, regardless of the fact that the United States and Germany were at the time protectionist countries and indeed continue to be, because their consumers were better off. If it was true that German banks or the German government, maybe more likely the banks, was subsidizing German steel making and making rails cheaper than, I was a student of these matters, than English makers, great. We in Britain get cheaper rails. Yes, let's do it. So it's trade policy tends to be based on a kind of mercantilist logic. That we'll get together and we'll agree to let you export to me, and I'll agree to export to you. That shouldn't be the issue. We should just let people buy. Here's the way to express it. What's the business of the British government in telling you who you can buy from? Why is it their business? ¿Por qué? I don't get it.
You do speak Spanish.
Everybody is fluent in Spanish.
So I will start to get the next question. You know what? I'll get the guy all the way from the back because you raised hand. So let's pass the microphone all the way to the back. Yes.
Okay, so hello, thank you for everything you said so far. So my question was regarding something you said earlier about how politicians in Whitehall and obviously other governments around the world with arts degrees are underqualified to make economic decisions. I think that's true, but also isn't that the purpose of having like government advisors with expertise in the field? Like, what do you think is like a happy balance between having like technocratic governments with economic advisors making the complete decisions, but also having like politicians in a way to make sure that I don't know, people's interests are represented?
No, I want the politicians to be in charge. I'm not saying that, oh well, we should hand it over to the LSE Department of Economics. Thank you very much, although they're very nice. But I am saying that government should be smaller and less extensive, both in expenditure and in regulation. That you could call it laissez-faire and say, oh, you're a laissez-faire fundamentalist, which, by the way, manages to sneer not only at me, but at people with religious faith. this constant talk about free market fundamentalism is very irritating. Stop it. Don't talk that way. Show me the evidence. Don't just make up insults. So, small government. Look, the city I lived in for 34 years, Chicago, in the late 19th century was one of the fastest growing cities in the world. Very successful economically. It was also one of the most corrupt in the world. Everybody was for sale, often to both sides, which is more profitable to think about it. This is what Francis Bacon was convicted of when he was the Lord Chancellor of England. All right, yet the government was small. So it didn't matter much, right? We have enormous governments now. I think most people don't quite realize how big government is. We had Will Rogers, the cowboy humorist in the 1920s, would say, "Be glad you don't get the government you pay for." Well, that government was really small by comparison. At its height, before the collapse in the early 90s, the Swedish government took 73% of the GDP of Sweden for its purposes.
In fact, I would like to encourage the audience, right, actually, to just look at any available statistics. I have actually done so, and just, track government spending as a share of GDP. It has not gone, it has not like dropped as, like the neoliberal market fundamentalists expected. Tax burden in the UK is an all-time high, 36%, close to 40% and rising. Regulation in the United States, measured by George Washington University, is like increasing at a steep rate. So when people say neoliberal market fundamentalism, I wish that were true actually.
Yeah, exactly. I wish they were.
Where is it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Where is Mr. Neoliberal Market Fundamentalist? I'd like to meet this guy. Right? Yes, please. Gentleman in the blue. Yeah, you. Yes, that's right. Just
My name is Chris Alexander. Do you think there's any merit in the argument that the benefits of innovation and growth are widely dispersed and the costs are concentrated in terms of dislocation of, Schumpeterian destruction? Do you think there's any merit in the argument that as globalization has expanded communications technologies, the rate of change becomes intolerable or increasingly detrimental, and therefore the social costs of the economic benefits become, that trade-off starts to tip?
I don't think so, but a few minor points. It's not Schumpeter, it's Zombart. Zombart invented the phrase creative destruction. Zombart was a very fine scholar, a Marxist economic historian in Germany. Schumpeter took over the phrase. Ask yourself, in rock music, is there creative destruction? Yep. In the evolution of language, is there creative destruction? Yep. In the evolution of species, is there creative destruction? Yep. In science, in the advance of science, is there creative destruction? Yes. Maybe we ought to stop being afraid of this destruction. In the United States every year, now here this is a remarkable number, 30,000 new consumer packaged products are introduced. 30,000 into grocery stores. Now, they aren't all introduced into the same grocery store, or then you would have this kind of sensory overload. You're talking about people would go mad. Where's my usual bread? You've got some new thing. No, they're introduced into hundreds and hundreds of grocery stores, tried out here, there, and everywhere. About 5% of them become permanent items in grocery stores. And we all see this in our ordinary consuming. What's the ordinary basket of a consumer gradually moves. So I don't think there's too much innovation. I think there's too little innovation, especially in Europe, and to a smaller extent, especially in the United States. And I believe it's stopped by excessive regulation, such as the Town and Country Planning Act of 1948, was it? So I think that we've got to be really careful here about this whole there's destruction. It's better that we grow up and accept change. Here's an analogy which might be helpful in you thinking about it. People sometimes say, I'm against immigration because it will change British culture. That's why we shouldn't have these people, legal or illegal, coming into Britain. In my own country, they say the same thing. Some people do. You think, well, yeah, gee, I kind of see I can kind of sympathize with their views. Suppose people stop drinking warm beer because too many Germans have come or something. All right, but culture changes. So if that's your argument, there should be government prevention of culture change.
To be clear, it's not my argument. I'm fully on board. But there may be a point at which that acceleration, the social costs of that, logically, it must be possible.
That's right, and that you're right. If 70 million people poured into Britain tomorrow, that would be quite disturbing. But understand that you see the analogy perfectly well, that it's the same kind of argument. Now then, you and I completely agree that then the question is empirical. How much?
But is there not a sense that there has been an acceleration? And I'm not particularly talking about innovation, because I agree, and I'm not even defending this position, I'm just floating a balloon here. But
I don't think so.
Fast following, for instance.
What kind of thing?
So fast following industries which are quickly copied and returns a bit away, that an acceleration of that will create more dislocation.
Well, so it will create dislocation, but it's good dislocation.
Unless in the aggregate, definitely.
Well, but look, then we're back to the question of whether protection is a good idea, whether we should keep industries the way they are now. Again, it's another analogy that if we freeze what we do now, then we can avoid any disturbance. But and I don't think either of us I don't think you're advocating that, and I'm not certainly. But it seems to, it's been used, let me say it, as politics. This kind of argument has been used to protect existing interests. And a spectacular example of it is planning permission in this country.
So on the social cost of dislocation, I think, personally, I think we could have a reasonable conversation about social safety nets. That's not incompatible with a free market economy and free society. We could say, governments, should maintain general sensible investments in education and universities. I think I could defend that, and I think Deirdre would defend that. So I think there are social costs of dislocation. I don't think that somehow necessitates that we just let everyone suffer, and good jobs and do nothing. So there is a room, I would say, for social safety nets. That would be my response.
Just to be very clear, I don't believe what I said. I'm just
No problem. We like live debate and discourse. All right, can I have another someone else? Yes, you.
Thank you. My question would be on national security and when
Put
people
the
say.
microphone closer to your mouth.
Sorry.
Thing is
The damn things never work.
Sorry, that's right. My question would be about national security and military arguments, and when people say, there's a scope of supply chains, military products that need to be produced within a country, and what should free marketers respond to those arguments, and how much should supply chains be restricted for national security reasons?
Yeah, well, my point would be rather similar as an economic historian to the kind of discussion I was having with the earlier speaker. This argument, which on a blackboard looks perfectly sensible and is worth considering, has been used repeatedly to increase rents to a particular group of manufacturers. I mean, just endlessly. The national defense exception has been used this way. And it's often, when you get a little bit further into the economics, it's often silly. We have in the United States, we have it's got some term which I'm going to screw up somehow, but a national defense pool of oil, which we can release in emergencies. It's so stupid because we've got a lot of oil in the United States anyway. And if there's one enemy who doesn't want to sell us oil, we've got other places to buy oil. But and in general on such matters of let's take the case of rare earths, for example. We can pile them up if we want. And there'll be incentives for private people to pile them up, just as they pile up grain, or for that matter, oil. So I'm although it's a nice blackboard argument, a nice case for government intervention, I'm saying that it's got a lot of problems.
All right. Next question. Yes, the gentleman just behind you. Yeah.
I may well be the only non-economist in the audience, so forgive me for this. But
I don't speak to non-economists.
there we go. Well, I'm classic. I'll try and make this quick. I'm struggling because I don't know what the framing of the title specifically is. Has the free market failed at what? So my first point is a rhetorical one, because there could be an equivocation. A market failure does not mean the free market has failed.
That's right, good point.
So my second, and so that's slippery. But my second set of points is, look, a whole number of perspectives from great thinkers would answer this question in certain ways. For example, if you're Kant, you might say, has there been a failure of the exercise of reason and rationality to deliver, as you very, I think, compellingly talked about, a mature society, an unenlightened society? If you're Rawls, architect of liberalism, you might say, has it failed to deliver equality of opportunity, not outcome, but opportunity? Yeah. If you're Keynes, where is the 17-hour working week and all the leisure that we're supposed to have? If you're Hayek, maybe that's something around the aggregate wealth. It has failed or hasn't failed to deliver that or maximise it. And maybe if you're Smith, it may have failed or not failed to deliver productivity gains in terms of the pursuit of self-interest. So my question, as I sat here, very interesting stuff, innovation is failed at what? Sorry, it's a long point.
Well, I think that's an excellent sort of framing point. And I would say that it's not failed on any of those grounds, that is liberalism,
as we understand it.
I don't think the free market alone is enough. In other words, you're from Singapore, which has a free market, but in which the premier puts some of his political enemies in prison, and I wish he wouldn't. So I want liberalism in general, not just the economics. I want not just high GDP per capita.
Yeah, rights, for example.
But I think we're in a mood, and I don't quite know the reasons for it, where we're comparing the actual with the perfect in a way that's kind of dangerous. And we keep doing it. This is utopian. This veil of tears is nothing like what we were going to get in heaven and so forth. And I think it's rather dangerous to throw away the liberties we have with schemes that economists and others have come up with to get us right to perfection. If you'll just let the central bank fool around with the interest rate and the money supply, all will be well. And I wish we would stop thinking that that's a smart idea. I have to agree. Now, here I think we are in complete agreement. There is a worldwide disappointment with liberalism, and I wish people would stop it. It's like saying there's a worldwide disappointment with that reigns sometimes.
And the term itself is worth just breaking down. There's economic liberalism, there's liberalism on the right and the left, and so on and so forth. So terminology is so important in this debate, but I agree with you.
Both of them feel disappointed.
They do, for different reasons.
The moderate right, those are my friends Fukuyama and Sunstein, and then the more extremes, they're all disappointed. I wish they would grow up and realize that, as my friend John Mueller says, it's pretty good. And maybe messing with it and making, well, actually, this is interesting because I had a debate with James Robinson, who was one of the three people who got the Nobel Prize last year. And Jim is a political scientist. And I debated him the week after the Nobel Prize was announced. And I had a chart, which I can't instantly put up here, where I said, Jim, what you're thinking of is that human flourishing will go on getting better if we make the state bigger, make coercion bigger, state coercion bigger. And I say, wait a minute, and as George Orwell and a ton of people in the 40s said, watch out. We keep applying coercions more and more and more. You get, we economists say, diminishing returns. Watch out. We may be going down. So, as I've been saying repeatedly to lots of people, it's an empirical question. It's not to be solved by me standing here and asserting it. And it's not to be solved by just having a mood that I wish things were better. And gosh, there must be something deeply wrong with, let's put it this way, I haven't ever quite thought of this. My friends on the left, having been a socialist myself once, a Marxist, I can feel their pain. And it's, as Clinton would say. There's a feeling on the left, and on the right for that matter. Yeah, I'm just thinking that they both. Let's talk about the left. That this society is so damn irritatingly imperfect. There are some people who make more than others, and some people have advantages and some don't. This is so crappy. I have a friend, a Marxist friend, Joe, Amarillo is his name. He's a wonderful, smart man. He said, we were walking along one day and he said, I hate the market. And I said, Jack, your home is filled with antiques, furniture that you have bought in the market. He said, I don't care. I hate the market. And that kind of feeling that this is a dirty society, I hate. Well, I too hate hierarchy, but I don't hate the market. And that leads to the conception that we've got to break it and get something else. And I'm telling you, dears, it usually doesn't work out.
All right, next question. Yeah, gentlemen, yeah, just beside, yes.
Thank you. I'm just.
Could the next voice be a female voice, please?
I can pass it off if you'd rather.
Yeah, I'm afraid you can't.
Ask the question first you have.
Oh yeah, now you have it. It's okay, but I want a woman to be the next questioner.
Well, thank you for the talk so far. I was just wondering, turning back to the question of
market fundamentalism.
How would you respond to people who would outflank people like Stiglitz and Fukuyama? I found it interesting that you put Fukuyama on the left, who would outflank them from the left, and agree with you in the idea that modern liberal economics serves to legitimize a neoliberal political project that doesn't believe what it's saying, i.e. Margaret Thatcher quoting Adam Smith while ballooning state spending, but just putting it on coercive state practices like an expansion of the police.
Get your point.
Put the microphone by your mouth.
I'm sorry, it kept cutting, so I tried to just shout. How would you respond to libertarians who would outflank people like Stiglitz and Fukuyama from the left and dispute the notion that the free market is failing, rather than the externalities that you recognise as a result of political hierarchy and that leftists, traditional leftists, would say is because of political interference? The free market is actually functioning exactly as intended, that is, to enrich a very few private capitalists in strong collusion with state entities. For example, Margaret Thatcher ballooning state spending while quoting Adam Smith, but not the other book about moral sentiments, just the one about the free market.
It's claimed that the so-called capitalism, and I would prefer to call it innovism, but capitalism is an inequality machine making the rich better off. It's not. Crony capitalism is. And there, you and I can go out here and protest crony capitalism. I'm all for it. I'm against crony capitalism. So I'm against using the government to protect rents. I don't want to get too complicated about this, but capitalism, understood as free entry into trades and products, is an equality machine. It makes people equal. Let me take an example. Occupational licensure is a violation of liberty. It's outrageous. We shouldn't have state-enforced, understand I say state-enforced, the fist of the state is used to enforce occupational licensure of doctors, medical doctors, or lawyers, or anyone else. In economics, we don't have licenses. Anyone in this room can hang out a shingle, economic advice sold here. Feel free. don't want there to be a state board or a private board supported by the state to keep economists scarce, even though it would be to my personal interest. So, crony capitalism is occupational licensure. And over and over and over again, protectionism is crony capitalism. What's his name? The guy at Yale got a Nobel Prize. No, not Schiller. No, the guy did on the environment. What's his name? Yeah. Bill Nordhaus calculated that all the gain from innovations in the United States since the Second World War, only 2% of the gain has gone to the inventors or the entrepreneurs. 98% has gone to consumers. Now, what's the inequality in that? It's true that the Walton family is fantastically rich because Walmart makes a ton of money. But it sells products to poor people. That's really why some people don't like it. Oh, there's Walmart. I would never go to Walmart. I prefer rich stores. Anyway, 98%. So real capitalism works as an equalizer.
Can you just say one more thing about income inequality? Rather than looking at the gap, which is about inequality, I suggest looking at income mobility, right? Because income mobility is the idea that some individuals can move up the ladder, right? So we need to have a dynamic view of people's income. But the problem with looking at gaps, right, usually is that the dynamic changes of people's households over time is obscured in that statistic. Right? And usually the free market, tends to
it's quite absurd for a graduate student in the economics department, for example, to say, "Oh, I'm terribly poor." The hell you are, dear. You're about to get a PhD in economics and go work in the city. Your lifetime income is going to be much higher than your mate from grammar school who didn't graduate from high school. But and by the way, world equality is increasing. It's quite important to remember that, and I think sensible people all agree that individual inequality in the world has gone down dramatically in the last half century. Not only, but to some large extent, because of the considerable enrichment of China and now India.
Right, okay. Next question, if there's any. Let's see.
Oh yeah, it's a female voice.
Hello, my name is Sakshi. Earlier, to answer a question, you mentioned that you would prefer a smaller...
Hold the microphone closer.
You can speak a bit louder, yeah.
Yeah, earlier, to answer a question, you mentioned that you would prefer a smaller state rather than a bigger one. And you gave an example of Chicago, where while it was economically growing exponentially, it was very corrupt. I find it quite absurd that you gave example of a state that was a society that was running very corrupt. For me,
recommend corruption.
For me, a bigger state allows more people to have access to be able to work around free market and participate in the free market. And if the state is smaller, for example, in India, where I come from, a bigger state has allowed more penetration of people to express their voice, perhaps start a business, do their good and provide for the society. if the state is smaller, we come down to the very few people are in power, and I don't see it as ideal society.
Well, you know, I got into an argument last year with with the chief economic advisor to Modi at a conference, and he was saying just what you're saying, and I said you're wrong, and that was kind of the sum total of our discussion. The 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 a bigger state is in some fundamentals necessarily more coercive. For one thing, if what you mean by a bigger state is larger expenditure, you've got to tax people more. And taxation is coercion. I mean, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying we should have zero taxation, but I am saying it's coercion. And and if you mean by a bigger state that there are more regulations, and I think you'll agree, that's more coercion. Yeah, I think you need to examine, and I'm not accusing you of being crazy or something, but you need to examine this word penetration that you're using. You have to ask yourself what exactly that means. If it means that more Indian children are being educated in public schools, then you and I can agree that that sounds like a fine idea. But if it means that more Muslims are being persecuted by the Indian government, then maybe I think we can agree that's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, I'm not supporting fascism. I just want a bigger state so people are actually able to participate in society.
Except that bigger. Now here we get back to something very fundamental. What do you want? Do you want people to be children of the state, or do you want them to be adults and free?
I want social mobility and economic mobility in society, but that's only possible if people are given opportunity to participate.
No, the state takes away opportunities. It gives opportunities to some people, to its favorite people, whoever they are, but it takes it away from others, almost necessarily. Now, that again, to go back to the theme of this discussion, is an empirical question, and you and I would really have to sit down and get very clear about what we mean by penetration, or being free, or being non-free. But here's something absolutely crucial. In English, there are two words for liberty. One of them is German, freedom. The other one is Latin. I always start with my favorite word, liberty. In English, in the last century, the freedom word has gotten to be bigger. And it means what Isaiah Berlin called positive liberty. Namely, having stuff. Having what my friend Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen calls capabilities. And I say that that's the wrong way to think about a free society. It's better to think in Schlar's terms, or in mine, or in Adam Smith's, or Mary Wollstonecraft's: fear of the government, protection from the coercions of the government, and then what happens, and this I'm asserting as an economic historian, and I'm not just asserting it casually, I've written 3 long books trying to prove it, that liberty, not freedom, not this freedom to do, but freedom from, results in enrichment. And how do I know this? It's happening in India right now.
If I may just respond a little bit to your question, right? So when we think of the state, right, what is the image that comes to our mind? right? Some people think, oh, like public spirited people trying to help you in building schools and things. That's true to some extent, but I would say everything that the state can give you, it first takes from you.
That's right.
There is nothing the state that nothing that the state gives that it first does not take.
Yes.
Everything that the state does, right, is financed through extraction of wealth at the point of a gun.
There's no such thing as a free state.
So you need, of course, some of that, okay, national defense, public schools rules, right? But be very careful if we say we want to expand that dramatically, right? Because we are thinking of coercion in this case. Okay, I think we just have time for one last question before we end. Yeah, I'll give it to this gentleman.
Thank you so much. My name is Salman. I want to thank Moni and Bryan for this amazing event. Before I thank you, Professor, thank you so much. And I want to ask you about Milton Friedman that says there are three frontiers that the government is definitely failing. One is the size, the other is timing, and the other is direction. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Existence. That's a complicated, me. I was Milton's colleague for 12 years, and I admire him very much. He was a nice guy. He was kind of humorless, which was too bad. But he was a respectful person. When someone argued with him, he wouldn't walk away. He would say, "No, let's think about it. How does it go? Now let's see. What can we agree in a positive sense?" I have nothing to add to his skepticism. There was a hand over here that I want to indulge.
Yeah,
over
so
there.
one last question, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So we've talked about a lot of restrictions to the free market, be it immigration restrictions, tariffs on trade, and even how we address national security. One regulation I think is overlooked, especially with the rise of AI and new tech, is intellectual property. And will there become a time where we have to rethink whether intellectual property, be it patents, copyrights, or trademarks, are in fact an impediment on the free market?
They are. That's my brief answer. I was just discussing this last night with a colleague of yours here at the LSE. And you have to know that patents and copyrights were invented by the Venetians, those same people in Venice a long time ago, and they were experts at monopoly. And look, if copyrights and patents could be short and not subject to political pressure to make them longer and longer and longer, I'd be satisfied. I wouldn't think it's such a wonderful idea. The notion of intellectual property, which some economists kind of uncritically adopt because it sounds good. Oh, property, oh yeah, we should have property. Should we have property in your opinion of me? Should I be able to sue you because of your opinion of me? Do I have property over your mind? No. And I think intellectual property is an employment device for lawyers, and I'm against it. Just as a side thing, I have a book called The Applied Theory of Price, last printed in 1985, which is a very good way to learn microeconomics. If you want to learn Chicago-style micro, go to my book. It's free online at my website. If you want to really become an economist, read books like mine. That book, or George Stigler's, or Milton Friedman's, or what's his name? Steve Lansberg, or Milton Friedman's son, David Friedman. He has one free on his website too. Read those, and then you'll actually be an economist. But the University of Chicago Press wants to reissue it. Not reprint it, but reissue it. We can't find out who has the copyright. This is maddening. I hate the copyright and patent system.
Right, unfortunately, we have to call it a day and end here. Can I ask all of you to give Deirdre a round of applause and